Hey y'all, thanks for being here today. So, who here remembers having to run the mile in gym class? Anybody? Okay, it's one of those if you know, you know. For those of you lucky ones who didn't have to, we used to have to run a mile once a week. For me, it was in middle school. And I know for some people, a little mile is nothing. There were the classmates where for them it was a breeze. But there were also always the ones who were suddenly sick and needed to go to the nurse's office, or the ones who bare minimum, if they were gonna do it, had a tactical shortcut for it. Mine was through the portables. But whenever the mile came around, for some people, that was a big day. So for context, and to keep a very complex story short, I was born with a foot condition and issues in my ligaments, and I genuinely don't remember a time in my life where I haven't dealt with pain. What would later in my life become diagnosed as a disability in my childhood was just a pain I knew to be normal. It was a part of me. That's just what it felt like to exist. Why talk about it? Why take up the space? I saw what it was like to be perceived, and I chose to be as digestible as possible. When the mile would come up, out of pure stubbornness to be in the ranks of somebody who at least did it, even if I was cutting through the portables on the blatantly obvious tarmac anyone could see me running through, I would grit my teeth and bear through it, sometimes causing damages I would pay for the rest of that school day, or sometimes week. But in my mind, silently suffering through that endeavor was way better than being the thick girl saying she can't run because her feet hurt. I even had doctor's notes saying I shouldn't be running because of my condition that I never turned into my teachers. I was worried they wouldn't believe me and would just think I was the master of excuses, which, to be fair, if you ever had to deal with me at all in high school, I was. But oddly enough, not with this. This was too revealing. I was already so different in so many other ways, spiritually, physically, culturally, which of course, now with age, I've come to realize is all the fly things about me. But to be even more unlike everyone else, let alone the girl with freaky feet, it wasn't something I was signing up for willingly. This approach became foundational to how I've chosen to silently navigate a lot of hurdles in life. I built up this thick skin, which I'm both grateful for and see the cons in. But I built up this thick skin telling myself it didn't matter if others didn't necessarily see me for my potential, see how strong I was or how graceful it felt like I was dealing with the cards I was dealt. It didn't matter because I knew my worth. And deep down, whether intuitive or delusional, I knew I was somehow gonna figure this out and come out on top. But as they say, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. So while I was busy tolerating till this someday arrived, to the outside world, and really to myself, I wasn't voicing the agony or what it felt like to be in my body. I would endure the pain because in my mind, that was what it meant to be strong. This became a coping mechanism I'm still deeply battling. But what I've learned the hard way is, often what comes with tolerating things to such an extent that you aren't showing up fully as who you are, one, comes a ton of awkward moments. Things don't add up because you're juggling things people can't see. There's so many people who probably think I'm weird or my energy's off because honestly, I was just trying not to wince out in pain while standing there talking to them. But two, when we aren't able or choose not to show up fully, there's also a loss of potential, a lost opportunity for communal growth and pure connection, to see what happens when we just show up genuinely. And I get it, we're all juggling things people can't see, and context, of course, matters here. But so often we are limiting ourselves by obeying these social constructs of what it means to be strong. One of the most damaging myths about resiliency is this idea that we have to suppress our emotions, that being resilient means being unbreakable. But y'all, that's so surface level, and not even what I found to be true. When asked for this, what resilience means to me, and what it would look like to rethink it, I remember my gut reaction, and more so the feeling I felt, was a sucker punch to the stomach, a quick reminder of the whole world I was tolerating silently, and all of the things people go through that they never asked for. Resilient is something you can be so proud to be called, yet so incredibly sad you have to be it. For many people, I can imagine there's a lot of weight that comes with that word. And in order to rethink it, I believe it's important we unpack what we really associate with resiliency in the first place. I'd like to take a quick moment as a group to gauge what our own personal relationship and associations with it are. So self-reflect with me for a sec. What comes to mind when you think of the word resiliency? Do you have a negative or positive connotation with it? What was your gut instinct? Was it defensive or open? Are there any specific moments flashing in your mind, or real memories? Any expectations you feel are placed on you in order to be it? Does it feel intriguing or heavy, like an obligation? I found when doing this activity a huge association with resilience I had outside of the mile was still tolerance and the ability of how much one could take without breaking or showing that pain. I'm a human. Of course, I've had to experience many moments of resiliency, but what I've come to find is I often, when it came to these at least, wasn't completing that process. I needed to fully face the layers of what I was dealing with. I needed to voice them, not stuff them down, numb myself to, or hide them. My threshold is high, but I wasn't fully processing. And a lot of people, for many reasons, don't have the luxury to just exit survival mode to process, but is being on autopilot resilient. In conversations with community, tolerance and having a high threshold was a reoccurring take people had on what it meant to be resilient. And in thinking of resilience as essentially a trauma response, I also found myself thinking of fight, flight, or freeze, and wondering what resilience looked like in our brains. I had the pleasure of getting to speak with a neurologist about this. In fact, I had a huge honor of getting to sit at a bar with a neurologist, astrophysicist, and hematologist, which someone pointed out does sound like the setup to some type of dad joke. I had the opportunity to ask all these amazing professionals what resilience looks like in their specific fields. What does resilience look like in our blood, our brains, the sky? We, of course, don't have time to review it all, but I found the neuroscience of it to be so interesting. And y'all, your girl was also humbled because I really went into this being like, oh, resiliency? I know a little something about that. But in looking at how resilience manifests in our brains, in observing what feels like such an emotional concept in such a matter-of-fact way, in outlines and blobs on a brain scan, it showed me resilience is so much more than just how much one can take. And it opened my eyes to the expectations we as a society, maybe not personally, but we as a society have placed around the idea of what really makes someone strong. Now, in this process, I've learned just enough about the brain to know I'm fascinated, okay? So to put it extremely generally, for resilience to take place in our brains, it requires more than tolerance. It actually requires a full process of confronting our emotions associated with the pain point and then returning to our brain's equilibrium after it was disrupted, ideally stronger. In our brains, resilience is like a muscle to be developed. It's training our brains to adapt, to approach challenges with curiosity and flexibility rather than fear. And so yes, tolerance is usually involved, and yes, it intersects, but there's actually a whole world, a whole journey, if you will, that needs to follow through for resilience to actually take place in these wild brains of ours. And I don't think this distinction between tolerance and resilience means tolerance is negative or the opposite of strength. It's just not the completed loop that resiliency is. Tolerance is what we're doing while we move through the larger process of resiliency. But if all we do is tolerate, we're not completing that process. Used inappropriately, tolerance can be kind of like cutting through the portables and not running that full mile. Tolerance is what we're doing while we move through that. And yes, tolerance and endurance help us get through our toughest moments. But depending solely on this form of coping has its limits. We can end up in a different brain loop of suppression, turning an opportunity for growth into silent suffering. So what does this mean? I'm not about to be the jackass who had one sit down with some brilliant doctors and then comes up to do a TED Talk on how our brains work. But I am hoping we can use these nuggets they gave to maybe not so much rethink, but reconcile some of the expectations placed around the idea of resiliency. So often our day-to-day lives are filled with the quick passing and often dishonestly answered, how are you? Good, how are you? Which look, I know we all have our own business we're really not trying to talk about in a checkout line at a grocery store. There's of course a time and place, but generally speaking, we constantly are seeing people putting up fronts. What does this do to us on a societal level? I think often society and the media has this lazy formula of everything being this or that, good or bad, the right side or the wrong, black or white. There's no nuance in clickbait. But I believe resilience lives in the gray area. Behind so many strong people is a story that gave them absolutely no choice. There can be so much injustice and negativity demanding resiliency. It can be harrowing. It's also something we strive to wear like a badge of honor, like persevering through a grueling challenge. And what a dichotomy that simultaneously resilient moments can also be really raw and beautiful, like childbirth. I believe it's important we create space for all the nuance and the ingredients that make up resiliency, because that's what makes it so good. So to wrap things up, when I was in my mid-20s, a specialist told me if I didn't get surgery on both my feet and legs, I wouldn't be walking normally or at all by my late 30s. And while I remember sitting in the parking lot after that appointment, thinking of all the ripping, breaking, slicing they just said they needed to do to me, I wasn't verbatim, but it was the vibe. So much the vibe. I remember sitting in that parking lot while very overwhelmed, also thinking in the back of my mind, this is it. This is how I'm gonna come up and be at my best. Let's finally see who she can be when she's pain-free. Let them see what I can build on an actual strong foundation. But it's that mind frame. I thought I had to be something else. My ego wants flawless, okay? I thought I had to eliminate my physical issues and all the burdens I was silently bearing in order to really be able to start my journey in life. As if my journey, my whole life, hadn't already begun. I was acting as if resiliency was simply about being able to wait it out, tolerating just long enough until that perfect moment, that one surgery, that one change, where I could then grow into my full potential. We hinder ourselves by thinking until we are perfect, we can't blossom. So in 2021, I got the surgery, the first part at least. And that whole depressing saga is a story for another day. But I bring it up because it wasn't successful. It wasn't my tipping point, or at least the kind I had hoped for. It actually caused further complications, and I'm still navigating what comes next. So imagine if I had still been waiting, my full potential still on hold for someday. And it still feels someday away all the time, y'all. I'm dealing with tons of physical issues from this. I'm in the nitty-gritty of this storm. But this storm has, however, catapulted me into the next steps of resiliency. It's forced me to have to start learning to voice it, look at it. No longer something I can just silently tolerate, or at least as much. And I'm not saying it's all good now. I'm not emotionally facing my way to new ligaments. Y'all know, more often than not, our hurdles aren't ones we necessarily have control over. How do we keep calm and carry on, or just keep going, man? How do we persevere through hard realities? It's layered. So what does it mean to rethink resiliency? It means we need to come to a group consensus that we're no longer going to place expectations of sheer tolerance alone on one another or ourselves in order to be resilient. It's great to be unbreakable, but I believe we can still be resilient after breaking. In fact, I think it comes right after we did. To a reasonable extent, let's be open to sharing our vulnerabilities with others, to give room for people to just come as they are. Because when we do that, we create space for a deeper, much more interesting connection. We're a lot cooler when we're not trying to be cool. It's not always easy. In fact, it's probably one of the hardest things to do. But I found when we strip away the ego, when we allow ourselves to stop worrying about how we will be perceived, and instead just show up real with where we're at, that's where the magic happens. That's where true transformation begins. So as we rethink resilience today, let's remember it's not just about how much we can endure without feeling. It's actually about feeling deeply and still finding the strength to move forward. It's about closing that loop in our brains and flexing those neurons, asking ourselves, am I waiting? Embracing vulnerability. And at the end of the day, sometimes the corny Hallmark sounding ideas are true. Resilience is about hope. It's about reaching forward, learning, and becoming more than who we were before. So let's celebrate this wild thing they call resilience and all of the beautifully chaotic, transformative mess of an experience it can be, because that's the kind of resilience that will carry us onward and possibly introduce some completely new chapters into our lives. Thank you.